Let's take a look at creating some content components. What we'll do is let's open up the page templates. And here's that template we're working on. I'm noticing here it doesn't have a title, so I'll add one. Now when I refresh, okay, perfect. Now it's properly capitalized. So let's open up the developer preview. And here are the two items that we're going to turn into components. We have the banner and this tiles section. So let's start out with the banner. We'll add a script tag, and the type of that script tag is going to be text/CMS component template. And we'll do the same for the tiles. Also add a CMS config section. Set component config. And we'll give this component an ID. Title. And we'll set the target to content. There's three types of targets: content, page, and site. Content components are components that are used inside of the editable areas. Page components are used as part of the page template, like sidebars and menus. And site components are used for exporting additional files unpublished, so like XML sitemaps or some routers. Start out with, we'll copy this component config to that tiles section as well. And we'll set the ID of that one to tiles, a different title. And save it. Let's see how it'll turn out. Okay, so now since they were converted into components, they're no longer in the body of the editor, but now we can add them to the content area by selecting them from the editor dropdown. So here we can insert our banner component, and here we can insert our tiles component. So that's a good start. Right now they both have the same icon, so let's go ahead and give them a different icon. CMS uses the jsHarmony material icon. So we can search here for, let's find a good image icon for the banner. We'll use this one. And the ID of that is going to be this, the word image here in this span. Set icon to material image. Alternatively, you could use an SVG for the icon, or so we'll add that for the tiles. Let's use this view module icon. So the ID of that is view_module. Now let's see how that's going to look. Okay, pretty good. So now next, let's add some properties to these components. So for this banner, we'll set the background image as a field, the link for this button as a field, and then the title and the body text as fields. So there are two types of fields. There's data fields and property fields. So we'll be adding both, but we're starting out with data fields. So we have the image, we have the link. The image will use the media browser control, which displays a pop-up allowing you to select a media item from the media gallery. The link will use a link browser control, and this will be another pop-up that will allow the user to select either a page or a media item. And finally, we have the title field. The control for that is going to be HTML editor, and same with the body tag. So now let's save, refresh. Now when we add that banner component, you can see we get this pop-up. Same thing when we double click on it, we'll get the pop-up that allows us to set these properties. Now let's connect those properties to the actual fields on the control. So first we'll set the image. Then the link. And I'm going to use an JSHarmony tag on this one so that if the link is not set, the entire href attribute will be removed. And for setting the title, we will use a CMS content editor attribute. Set that for the item.title property. And same for the body tag. Now if I try to save this, it's going to show me an error. You shouldn't use CMS content editor tags. You shouldn't add these attributes to p tags because p tags don't support line breaks. So if I save this and refresh, it'll give me an error that you can't use those CMS content editor attributes with the p tag. There's a way around it. If you really needed to, you can add the CMS editor on p attribute to that p tag as well. But what I'll do here, just so this works better, I'll convert this to a div. And at this point, try to add that banner. Pretty good. So here this title is editable. The body text is editable. Got a background image here. I'll need to upload something to the media library, so I'll just drag that in here. There we go. Now I set the background, and I can link to any of the pages or the media items. So I'll go ahead and link to the about page just to test it out. Okay, great. So the one last thing. So we went over adding data fields. Let's add some property fields. So we'll go to properties, fields. And we'll add two properties, one allowing the user to set a CSS style, and another one allowing the user to set a CSS class on the container. So let's try that out. All right, works great. One more thing, let's make that, since this doesn't really work well without a background image, let's make that background image required. So I'll go here, and under the image field, set validate required. So now if I insert, it's actually going to show me an error. Component data image is required, and it's going to continue to show that error until I set an image. Now there's one more issue with this. When I go to edit the data, this pop-up is a little narrow, so we can set a minimum size on that pop-up by adding a property to the data object here. Pop-up, and first value of the array is going to be the width, and the second value is going to be the height in pixels. All right, pretty good. So now we have our component working. All right, now let's take a look at creating the tiles component. So back here we have the tiles component. We have multiple items in this tiles listing. Each tile has an image on top and then a title and a body. So let's copy over the properties in the fields from the banner because it's pretty similar. And we just don't have the link, so we only have the image, the title, and the body. And now looking at the HTML, let's go ahead and add the image tag. Item.image. And for the alt text, why don't we set the alt text to be the item.title. Now for the title, we'll use the CMS content editor attribute. And for the body tag, we'll use the CMS content editor attribute. Except we'll need to change this p tag to a div again because the p tag doesn't support line breaks in the editor. So let's go into to preview that page. So we'll open up the site, go to the page templates, and open up that developer preview. And now let's try to insert the tiles component. So first we get this error, image is required. So let's go back and try to make that image optional. So to do that, we'll remove that validate property from the image field. And now once again, we'll go back here and try to add a file. And now we run into the issue here, which is that this current component is only configured to edit one item, whereas this tiles component needs to support multiple items. So to support multiple items, we need to add the multiple items attribute to that component config. We're setting multiple items to true. And now let's refresh. Okay, so now this error tells us that we set multiple items to true, but we're missing JSH for each item attribute. So we set the multiple items to true, but we're not looping over the items when we're rendering. So let's go back to the config, and we'll need to repeat this flex item box for each item. So we'll add JSH for each item here, and then we'll add that to the first item, and then we'll remove the second and third items because we'll have those auto-generated by the system. So now let's refresh. Okay, it looks like it's rendering now. So a couple issues here. One, it's only rendering at 1/3 the width. This is because of this flex3 attribute on the container. We'll want to remove this flex3 attribute when we're in the component editor. So we want it to show when we're on the page preview, but we don't want it to show when we're editing the component data. So to do that, we'll add an attribute called CMS component editor remove class. So we can remove that flex3 class in the component editor. And we'll try it again. All right, great. Now it's rendering wider. It looks like since the image can be optional, let's actually hide the image if it's not there. So hide the image. Let's add an EJS if statement around the full block. So if item.image, and we'll close that if statement there. Refresh. All right, perfect. And now if we add an image, then it renders above the title. And now the title and the body are both editable. So it looks like our component is turning out pretty well. So now let's add a couple more tiles here. Add one more. So after adding the tiles, they show up in this listing. So when you have multiple items set to true on a component, when you double click on it, you first get this scrolling listing of the items, and you can change the sort order, add and delete them. And then to edit one, you double click on it, and you can actually edit the title and body here and the properties for that specific item. So let's see what happens when you add a fourth item. So here, this breaks the styles because the container is only built to handle 3 items, but now we have 4 items in the list. So what we want to do is we want to repeat this entire container when there's more than 3 items. So to do that, we'll add this JSH group items into attribute. And this will group these items into group 3. So you won't have more than 3 items in a list. So now if we refresh this, and let's add the tiles. So let's add 4 tiles. Okay, and there we go. And now that 4th tile is wrapped in a new div down here. So the last thing that we'll do is let's move these components into separate files so that they can be shared between all templates. So here we'll do new file. Under the components folder, we'll call the first one banner.html, and we'll add another file for tiles.html, and then we'll cut that HTML code from there. We can remove the script tag wrapper. And we can also remove the ID, because the ID will be automatically set based on the file name. So we'll do the same thing for the banner. And let's see how this is going to work in an actual page. So let's add a home page here. So we can add our banner. And below that, we can add our tiles component. Okay, looking good.